Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Gardels. I'm the co-founder of the Berggruen Institute and the editor of Noema magazine. The title of this panel is Democracy in the Time of Crisis. And please follow us at #AthensDemocracy and for any comments you might want to send in or questions. Anyone who has watched the US presidential debate a couple of days ago cannot have any doubt that democracies across the West are in various stages of implosion. Democracy has been hit by successive crises in recent years. The financial crisis, the Euro crisis, the populist surge, COVID pandemic, racial injustice uprisings. The cumulative impact of these crises has been to break the mold of politics, the old mold of politics. There's no going back to the old ways of the moribund political class that has failed. So there's a search on for a new politics. And that search is taking two opposite directions. One direction is the drift towards authoritarianism. The other direction understands that the only way to mend the breach of distrust between the institutions of self-government and the public is to more deeply engage citizens in governance. So today we are going to discuss how democracies are coping with these crises or not. And we will look a little bit at how alternative systems of governance, particularly in East Asia, are responding to the same set of issues. Now, our panelists today are Dubravka Suica, the Vice President, European Commission for Democracy and Demography. Kevin Casas-Zamora, Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Hind Ziane is the founder and CEO of Génération, Politique, and Kishore Mahbubani is a longtime friend of mine, a longtime well-known former director of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore. So I'd like to start this morning, if I may, Madam Vice Commissioner, to ask you the first question. The great target of populist ire has been the European Union. This is seen by many, of course, as a distant technocracy that's not in touch with the daily concerns of European citizens. In response to this rebellion, the European Union has decided to engage in this broad democratic consultation with citizens about the future of the EU. So what I'd like to ask you is to explain a little bit about that project and perhaps say a few words about other ways in which Brussels is trying to engage citizens.
Can you hear me? Yes, thank you for this question. Thank you for invitation, for inviting me to this important forum. Dear speakers, dear guests, dear ladies and gentlemen, all of us know that we are feeling economic, social, and psychological hardship of COVID-19. At the beginning of the year, none of us could have imagined the multiple effects of COVID-19. So this crisis has shown us what we should value most in our union, namely the need for unity and solidarity in difficult times. Also, we will make every effort not to waste this crisis, but rather to learn lessons. You know that the European Union blazes a trail when it comes to the protection and deepening of democratic values. And this goes hand in hand with human rights and rule of law. My objective from day one in my current role has been to invest all my energy in citizens' engagement and participation at all levels of policy making. Prior to COVID-19, I was on a listening tour of the European Union. I always try to go outside of the capitals, to rural areas, to villages, and to discuss with citizens and listen to great experiences they have to share with us. It is only through direct engagement and deliberation that we can successfully and constructively go through the green and digital transition. You know that these two are priorities of European Commission, but also to manage and learn from demographic change that is ultimately affecting the very way we live together. It is true that democracy is having a hard time these days, as you said in your question. People feel left behind. And what do they blame? They start blaming democracy itself. But democracy is still the best invention. There is nothing better. Still, we need to improve ways to respond to citizens' needs. Our representative democracy works well, but it is not without fault. Some say it is not responsive enough, or is it too mechanical or not inclusive enough? Should we get rid of it? Certainly not. But our society has changed, as you said. Our work in demography shows this. We therefore need new thinking. We cannot solve new problems with outdated ways of looking at the world. Politics is no longer business as usual. So the Conference on the Future of Europe, this is to answer your question, is a sign of new thinking at European level. It complements representative democracy and can increase trust in our democratic institutions. Through the conference, we will listen to Europeans and learn more about the issues close to their heart. The conference can help Europeans to feed their ways into policymaking at the heart of our European Union, and it should contribute to making our democracy more responsive. We started this innovative idea based on the evidence that people have a genuine desire to participate in democratic life beyond elections. So they don't want to participate only once in 4 or 5 years. People want to contribute to policymaking in their communities, in their regions, and in their countries. As you rightly said, there is a search for new models. With the conference, we want to create a new space for debate, reflection, and deliberation. This will contribute to reinforcing representative democracy. And this is particularly true for the European level, which sometimes feel more distant, less known, and less understood. Although we should admit that this is also because sometimes it is less well explained. The Conference on the Future of Europe is an opportunity to engage, but let me underline that we will only be successful if citizens from all walks of life and all communities will participate. So for us, inclusiveness is the first principle on which we want to build this conference. It is essential that we engage with the widest possible range of citizens, whoever and wherever they are. We will not leave anyone anywhere behind. There will be a particular focus on youth, since the future obviously belongs to our children and young citizens. Moreover, they are a crucial part of our present as well. And this is where this Athens Democracy Forum has a crucial role to play as a multiplier. Today we have here policymakers, civil society, think tanks, academics across Europe and the world. And when we work together, we can inform and mobilize citizens at the local level and reach out to those citizens that usually do not engage. Also the citizens that usually do not engage with us. And I would like to encourage you to seize this opportunity to get involved in the conference, and I count on your expertise and on your energy, of course. You know, only a small explanation. Debates will take place at local, regional, national, and European levels all across Union. It will be interactive dialogues, randomly selected citizens panels or plenary sessions. So using a mixture of physical, online, and hybrid events, everyone will have the possibility to participate in an interactive way, including via interactive pan-European and multilingual digital platform which is designed to be one-stop shop for all information relating to the conference. So it's multilingual and digital, and it's in accordance with our priorities, because, as I said, digital and green are the first priorities of this commission. Most of all, we want citizens to see the concrete, tangible results of their deliberations. And what we also want to achieve, predetermining the outcome would cause more damage to democracy than if we did nothing at all. So concrete follow-up will be the measure of our success. This is the difference from previous citizens' dialogues and nowadays conference. So follow-up will be our benchmark. So President von der Leyen was the first to commit to this in her political guidelines at the beginning of her term, and I intend to see it through. Regarding the topics, if I may say so, the conference is open. So I said inclusiveness is first principle. Second principle is openness. So it is guiding principles. Citizens should be able to raise and discuss any topic that matters to them, ranging from economy, social dimension, European policies, climate, digitalization. But, as I might admit, having held already many dialogues with citizens, I'm convinced that issues as healthcare and the European Union's response to the public health crisis will now have a more prominent role. Although at the beginning of this term, I wouldn't think so. But now I'm sure that this is a problem. And of course, eradicating racism and discrimination is always high on our agenda. And of course, it can be addressed too in the Conference of the Future of Europe. But let us see what are citizens' concerns, hopes, ideas, proposals. So for the beginning, maybe this is enough. I can go on, but let us, you can put me questions. So inclusiveness, openness, and transparency are the key guiding principles of this conference, and the benchmark is follow up of what citizens said during these deliberations. This is the reason why we want to narrow this gap you were mentioning at the beginning between us politicians and citizens. And you said politics is no more business as usual. I'm sure it is not anymore business as usual. And this is the reason why we are searching for these innovative ways for closing and coming closer to our stakeholders, which are citizens.
Thank you very much. I just want to ask you, just make one question. We can come back later because I want to move on to the other panelists. But this idea of enhancing the space of citizen engagement as a complement to representative government is in some way a new model, a new politics, the way we've been talking. And I'm curious, not answer now, we'll come back to it, if this is a one-off consultation or if there's any idea of institutionalizing citizen engagement as part of the governing process of the EU. But I'll come back to that question. I want to go to our other panelists, because you've talked about citizen engagement with the initiative from the top to invite citizens into the process. Hind has a project of Génération Politique, comes from the other direction, is how to build democracy and empower citizens from the bottom. So I'd like to ask Hind to be concise in her comments outlining your theory of change about democracy, and then we'll move on to the other panelists. Hind, may I ask you?
Thank you, Nathan. So the very first point that I would like to make is that we are in a time of crisis. And I think this crisis that's been going on for a couple of months all over the world has been telling us two things. The first thing is that our democracies are not equipped to face that kind of huge cataclysmic event. The second lesson that we've learned, and that we actually have been knowing for some time, is that our democracies need to change. They are not able to operate normally anymore. And so this concept of crisis and opportunity behind it, I think it's key. It's, even we're in Athens, the very first theorists of democracy, practitioners of democracy, if you take Solon, if you take Cleisthenes, or if you take someone else like Pericles. Their idea of democracy was a very practical one. It means, how do we integrate people more frequently in the process with the objective of making the system better? So it was very practical. I'm raising this point because I would like to point out the fact that this is a great opportunity for us as a system, as a political system, to move forward and to change. So I do see it as a golden opportunity. Now, coming back to your question, I believe that the legitimacy of our democratic system is based on trust. It's really based on if people trust the system, trust politicians or not. And I believe that in this element, the human relationship is really key. Is today we have to restore the human relationship between people, between citizens, but also between politicians and citizens. You know, I think all over the world, we have this issue of trust, of politicians not being connected, truly connected in an authentic way to people. And I think a very concrete way of doing that, of restoring that trust in our societies, in our democracy, would be if political institutions actually have a blueprint and a team dedicated to building a sane and healthy relationship with people. Now, I think that as long as we don't actually pin down the problem and truly, truly make an effort to solve it, we're not going to be able to. This leads me to another point, which is really similar, at least very close. It's the micro level. Our democracies have become very detached from the territories, from the very, very micro level. Now, by micro level, I'm not talking about countries anymore. I'm not talking about cities. I'm really talking about neighborhoods. I'm talking about streets. I'm talking about sometimes buildings. And the idea is really to know how we can get all of those people together, integrate them in the governing process, and find solutions to the problems that we face on the ground. Now, why is it really important to be on the ground and to really have this micro level kind of thinking? It's because, first of all, a lot of political systems are not capable of facing the problems today because they don't know what the problems are. Now, if you take the habit of working on the ground with local leaders, with people, like really street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, that's the only way to make our democracies healthier. You're going to have some live feedback. You're going to be knowing much more. You're going to be hands-on with what happens on the ground. And so something very concrete to move towards that would be that elected officials have a group of citizens attached to their mandate. So it means that as soon as you are in office, whatever kind of office you're holding, you reach out to the people, you get them together, those who want to, and you tell them for the next 5 years, for the next 6 years, I'm going to need you guys to know what's going on the ground. And then we create an ecosystem of thinking, of people brainstorming together and trying to come up with solutions that are concrete and they're very relevant to what's happening on the ground. So that's my take on these issues, and that maybe we can talk later about democracy. And
excellent, thank you. In a way, you're paralleling what Madam Vice Commissioner said about complementing representative government with citizen engagement by having this consultative group of citizens attached to the mandate of an elected official, but at the micro level, not at the huge level, and restoring governance based on what's on the ground and human relations, bringing human relations back to democracy. And that reminds me, for those who are old enough to remember the Cold War, in the old days they used to talk about socialism with a human face, and now we're talking about democracy with a human face. So let me go on to the next panelist, to Kevin Casas-Zamora. Kevin, you have a bird's eye view through your Institute of Democracy and Electoral Assistance of what's going on, particularly in Latin America. I read a recent article in the Financial Times about Bolsonaro from Brazil and Manuel López Obrador from Mexico, that despite their defiance of science in this COVID crisis, their popularity remains. Populism of that nature was once thought to be in the past in Latin American history. But now we see it again alive and well in some places. So maybe you can give us an assessment of how you see the situation of democracy in Latin America today.
Well, thank you very much, Nathan, and I would like to thank the Athens Democracy Forum and the New York Times for the invitation. Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting story to tell about what's happening in Brazil and Mexico, because in some respects it appears to be counterintuitive. But before I go into that, if you allow me, Nathan, I would like to make 3 points, 3 general points, which are related in different ways to the resilience of democracy in times of crisis. I mean, my first point is about the need to make democracies more resistant to calamities, such as the current one. For that to happen, we must make democracies better at managing uncertainty. I mean, one of the main concerns that many of us have in the current context is that the use of emergency powers, which have been invoked all over the place, becomes par for the course in democratic systems. But here I would like to introduce a nuance. The real risk is that emergency measures become par for the course, not simply because authoritarian leaders, like Bolsonaro, say, demand those powers, but because fearful citizens tolerate them. In times of enormous uncertainty, the longing for the paternal embrace of authoritarian leaders can be a very powerful impulse. And to me, it is not random that the global advance of democracy over the past, say, half a century coincided with the ability of societies to reduce dramatically some of the most acute sources of human anxiety: violence, poverty, disease. The odds for the survival of democracy are much better when it proves able to lower social uncertainty to manageable levels. And that's why robust welfare states, solid rule of law, and sustained fiscal prudence are so critical, because they reduce uncertainty. My second general point is about a political lesson that has clearly emerged from this predicament. The response to the pandemic is not and should not be seen as a contest between democracies and authoritarian systems. The relevant question to me is a different one, and it goes back to the insight once expressed by the late Samuel Huntington. In this situation, the type of government a country has matters less than the degree of government it has. That is, the capacity of its institutions to act effectively. And there are authoritarian or hybrid systems with high state capacity, the likes of China or Singapore, just as there are authoritarian systems with pitifully low capacity, the likes of Venezuela. And there are democracies with high state capacity, it's the South Koreas and Germanys of this world, and those with low levels of it. A lot of the democracies in Latin America fall in that category. So, and that's the political cleavage that counts. And to me, a crucial implication flows from this. I mean, rather than choosing the embrace of authoritarianism, we should prioritize the measures that equip political systems and institutions to be more effective at providing goods and services, managing uncertainty, and dealing with crisis. And my third point is general point is about the social contract. I think this pandemic has been unforgiving in revealing the deep fault lines that are pulling societies apart. So if they are to fend off the dangers of populism and authoritarianism, many democracies will have to return to the drawing board and renegotiate the social contract, the distribution of burdens between social groups, and the relationship between states, societies, and markets. And in Latin America, which, as we know, has some of the world's worst income inequality levels, there's increasing talk of imposing wealth taxes to ensure that pain for the coronavirus does not fall mostly on the poor. And generally, everywhere there's greater recognition of the price that societies are paying for under providing public goods, particularly healthcare. So one could only hope that the sheer magnitude of this crisis will result in new constitutional settlements, in new fiscal pacts, in new social covenants of the kind that frequently emerges in post-conflict and post-authoritarian contexts. Now, a word about the specific cases of Brazil and Mexico. I think, well, to cut short a long story, I mean, there are two points that matter here. I mean, I think in both cases, López Obrador and Bolsonaro played down the public health aspect of the crisis, and they played up the economic aspect of the crisis, most clearly in Bolsonaro's case. And they were, in a way, ahead of the curve, because what's happening right now, pretty much everywhere, is that most people in Latin America, where the vast majority of people cannot afford the luxury of teleworking or of social distancing, most people are massively concerned about the economic consequences of the pandemic. And Latin America has had some of the longest and most draconian national lockdowns in the world. And all they have achieved is bringing the economies to their knees while the virus is running rampant. And interestingly, neither Bolsonaro nor López Obrador went for national lockdowns. At this point, 6 or 7 months into the pandemic, that position is probably closer to where the median citizen is in most Latin American countries.
Thank you, Kevin. I really like your point. In fact, I think it's the pertinent point is not about authoritarianism versus democracy necessarily. It's about good governance versus bad governance in either case. I think, as you put it, it's the cleavage that counts is governing capacity. More governance or less governance is what determines things. So this is a good segue to Kishore from Singapore, because Singapore has some of the best governance in the world. And so, Kishore, I would like to ask you, not so much is China doing better? Well, we know that China, all these people swimming in that swimming pool, a few months after the devastating outbreak in Wuhan, and we see the US can't rise to the challenge of COVID. We see a new surge in Europe. The question is not so much, what is it, well, I guess the question is, what is it about, not just China, but East Asia, like Taiwan or South Korea, that enables it to have that governing capacity that seems to be missing in many places in the West? You've studied this a lot and think about this a lot.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. I'm going to answer your question about why East Asia is doing relatively better. But to get there, I think we have to get to the heart of the question about the crisis in democracy. And as you know, very well, Nathan, the reason why democracy came to East Asia is because of the American model. I mean, South Korea went through this remarkable transformation. Taiwan went through this remarkable transformation. Indonesia went through a remarkable transformation, but they were guided by the gold standard of democracy, which is the United States of America. And here, the reason I highlight this is that in East Asia, what I see as the biggest threat to democracy in East Asia is how the gold standard of democracy has now become really corroded very badly. And I know we have very little time and we can't get into the complexity of the issues, but the United States, which used to be a sort of a very high functioning state, sending a man to the moon, massive middle class, suddenly has got all the attributes of a failed state in some ways, reduced life expectancy, high infant mortality, and Nicholas Kristof described how the United States is regressing in the social progress index. Now, I point out all these things to make the point that something fundamentally is going wrong here. And what I would like to emphasize is that the United States has gone from being a democracy towards becoming a plutocracy, where the amount of money you have determines the outcomes that you get in the society. And that's why it's not no longer a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's a government of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. And all the data shows that very clearly. Now, I highlight all these facts because my big worry about East Asia is that when people start comparing what's happening in China and how amazingly competent China has been, how it has had the greatest improvement in living standards in 4,000 years in the past 40 years, and then the United States is sliding down. What are the lessons that East Asians are learning from seeing all this? And I would say, to answer your question, there are three big lessons that I think that East Asians are going to learn, and I think are going to try and preserve to ensure that the democracies continue to remain strong in this region. The first thing, of course, is control the amount of money that goes into elections. And as you know, since the Citizens United decision in the Supreme Court, the floodgates were opened. There are no limits about the amount of money that can go into elections. And as a result of that, basically, when as I say in the US, when you have corruption, is legal. You can use money to influence the legislature to make sure that the pharmaceutical companies are free to set the prices they want because legislation blocks them. The second lesson they learn is that you got to have a balance between what I call the invisible hand of free markets and the visible hand of good governance. And in the United States, the visible hand of good governance has been weakened dramatically since the Reagan-Thatcher revolution. And many in East Asia are happy that they have kept the visible hand of good government. And the last lesson they've learned, frankly, and this is, of course, going to your heart of your point about why East Asians are doing relatively well, there is an inherent respect for government. Now, I say this because, as you know, Ronald Reagan famously said, government is not the solution, government is the problem. In East Asia, the view is that government is not the problem, government is the solution. So when Kevin was talking earlier about state capacity, to build state capacity, you got to first of all put the right people in government. And if you don't have the right people in government, you're going to end up with all the kind of state failures that you've seen. So I hope that the big lesson we have done from COVID-19 is, let's go back to basics, kill plutocracy, and try and build better governments. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kishore. Your point relates very much to what Kevin said about resilience. When you have a plutocracy, resilience is a very brittle thing, as we're seeing in the U.S. today. And part of the social contract is good governance. And so if you don't have those two things, you don't have much resilience. And I think that's what we're facing in this crisis of democracy in the West, at least. There are a couple questions from the student groups that are participating. And one question that I was going to ask as well and this would be to, actually kind of my question that was to you, Madam Vice Commissioner, about institutionalizing citizen participation. The question is about what are the ways that citizens can initiate, instead of waiting for the EU to come to them, what are the ways the citizens can initiate and try to get some response and some traction with the people in Brussels? Now, one idea, obviously, I mean, one thing that's out there is the ECI, the European Citizens Initiative, which allows citizens to petition the Commission, and under certain conditions, the Commission's bound to take it up or whatever. So maybe you can talk about what citizens can do to initiate, and then maybe you can add a thought to that. Please.
Sorry. As I said, we don't want to preempt the outcome of this conference, but this could be also one of the topics of debate. If citizens will ask for a permanent system to feed their views in European Union policy making, then I think the institution should take action to create a permanent space. But of course, we cannot, as I said, we cannot anticipate what citizens will discuss and deliberate. But we have other tools in place. As you mentioned, this is very important tool, European Citizens Initiative. It is really a great tool in the hands of citizens. It allows 1 million citizens from at least 1/4 of European Union member states to invite European Commission to take action. You know this. And according to the new improved regulation applicable from January the 1st this year, the Commission must react within 6 months of submission of European Citizens Initiative and must decide whether it would act by adopting legislation, act in some other way, or achieve the goals of the European Citizens Initiative. You know that we had already several initiatives, and out of 98 received, 75 were in fields of European Union competence, but only 5 have so far reached 1 million signatures. And the 2 cases, Commission took legislative initiatives. It was one, as you might remember, it was right to water, and another one was ban glyphosate and protect people and the environment from toxic pesticides. There was a case of one of us and stop vivisection. Commission decided not to take action. There is minority safe pack, which is, this initiative is still ongoing. So the Commission can only act if the areas where it has the power, if it is in the areas where it has the power to act. So we have always to think about the treaty, and as you know, Commission is guardian of the treaty. So we do not want to have the same issue with the Conference of the Future Europe. This is why we insist on the fact that it has to be a joint endeavor, and that all partners should commit to follow up what is agreed by conference. And I also want to highlight once again that President von der Leyen was the first to take a firm commitment in her political guidelines last year when she had her inaugural speech in European Parliament, and I hope that other institutions and other partners will do the same. So European Citizens Initiative is fine, we already have this tool, but we are looking for different innovative ideas. Pardon me?
Thank you very much. I was going to ask one question about the Citizens' Assembly in France. We don't have time, in which citizens came together after the Yellow Jacket Revolt to address climate change. But we have to end this conversation, which is just getting going. We'll all be engaged with it going forward. So I want to thank everyone for their participation from all over the world, and thank the Athens Forum for putting it all together. Thank you very much. Bye.